Welcome to my channel. My name's Jared. This is another Sunday update video. I also post silent build videos on Wednesdays, so be sure to check those out as well. Today, we're going to talk about the 356. So if you saw my last build video, you would have seen that I got the engine assembled. That went pretty smoothly. If you saw the previous update video, you know that I had a slight issue with the main bearings. I had to buy a new set of bearings kind of at the last minute. But I got those. Got them in, and everything went pretty smooth. When it came time to check the in play on the flywheel, the shim that was on the engine originally was not the right thickness. With the new bearings and the new flywheel, I needed a thicker shim, so I had to measure that and order that. And so that took several days to get that shim as well. But other than that, things went really well. I'm very happy with the way the engine is coming out. You'll see the carburetors are not installed and the fuel pump is not installed. I still have to rebuild both of those. So that's going to be the next build video for the 356. The plan is to rebuild the carbs, rebuild the fuel pump, put the fuel tank back in the car, put the engine in the car, and fire it up for the first time. That's my goal for the next build video. So hopefully that'll all happen in one video. But yeah, so that went well. You can see here, I've got a few sets of Solex carbs that I'm getting ready to start going through. So surely between the several sets that I have, I can get at least one good working set. I also have some really old original carb kits, like rebuild kits that I found on eBay that are going to be here, I think, today. So I should have everything I need to rebuild those. Now, the other thing that I've been doing that I didn't film is I've been converting the car from 6 volt to 12 volt. So I've kind of been doing that from the beginning. The tach was missing, so when I bought a new tach, I had the tach converted to 12 volt. The stereo I put in is 12 volt. But I still had a lot of other stuff to do. I had to replace the voltage regulator, which luckily I had one off of an old 912 project. Let's see, all the bulbs, of course, all the light bulbs had to be changed all through the dash, all the turn signals, headlights, everything like that, all had to be 12 volt. The wiper motor was the biggest challenge, the windshield wiper motor. The original 6 volt motor, people say you can run that motor and the gauges by using these resistors that drop the voltage down from 12 volt to 6 volt. I bought some of those resistors. They didn't seem to work at all. Also, I read that they get really hot, like they'll melt a wire if they're next to a wire, or they'll burn your finger. So I didn't like the idea of having really hot things like that under the dash. So I did read that you could swap out the 6 volt wiper motor for the 12 volt motor out of the 912s and early 911s. And again, I had one of those because I just have a bunch of parts from 912s left over from years past. So I swapped that out, but it was extremely challenging. You do it from under the dash. It's very, very difficult to get it in there. It doesn't fit exactly the same. You have to kind of modify it a little bit. But I got that in. And then the issue was mainly the gauges. So again, you can use those drop-down resistor things, but I didn't want to do that. So the amp meter seems to be just fine. That doesn't seem to matter if it's 6 volt or 12 volt. This oil pressure gauge, I got extremely lucky, and I had this exact gauge in my parts bin, but a 12 volt version. So same size, same color, even got correct patina on it and everything, so that was perfect. The multi-gauge over here for the oil temp and the fuel tank, I'll go over that in a second, but the fuel tank part, it seems to be just fine running off of 12 volt. I think it's just a ohm meter type thing. Anyway, that seems to work fine. I plugged in the sending unit from the tank, and I checked it, and it reads correct, you know, full and low and everything in between. But the oil temperature, was that temperature or pressure? Yeah, oil temperature gauge on top, that one I got lucky as well. You can see here, this is a 912 gauge. It has a temperature gauge up here, and then this light down here would be for the parking brake. But so it turns out that this gauge is the exact same diameter as the gauge in the car. Now you wouldn't want to replace that gauge with this gauge because this doesn't have the right information on it. But what also seems to be the case is that this piece here, you take off these 4 screws and this whole piece pops out, and that is the temperature gauge. So you don't even have to take the face off. You just pull this section out, and you might be able to see this one says 6 volt here, and of course I wrote it there to remind myself. But so this section I pulled out of the gauge that's in the 356, and I swapped it out with the portion from this 912 gauge, which is a 12 volt gauge. So I was able to just swap that over very easily, no special tools needed. So I was extremely happy with that. Also had to replace the flasher, but you can see here I have several of those that have come off 912s in the past. The only thing left to do now, I think, is replace the horns. There are 2 horns on that car, and so I've got one. I just got to find one other one. And then that's pretty much it. I think the car's completely converted over to 12 volt. Of course, the generator that I'm using is 12 volt, and everything on the engine, I mean, it's a 912 engine anyway, but it's completely set up for 12 volts. So that all went well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I also bled the brakes since my last update video, and that went smoothly. There were a few little issues, I think, with the front end on one of the turn signals. I had to replace the new housing for that. But that's pretty much it. Everything else is going... Well, there's one other thing. So the transmission, I mentioned that I have a little bit of a leak, and you can kind of see down there where it's dripped just a little bit. And that's been over the course of at least a week or more. Well, there's a few things to know about that I may have hopefully figured that out. So first of all, one person said, once you put the car on the ground, that leak might go away. They've had that situation because with the car jacked up, there's a lot more like tension and pull on these axles than there will be once it's setting flat. So that may be it. But I also noticed that the shifter shaft on the front of the transmission, which has a new seal on it, and that shaft seemed to be in good shape, that's leaking. I took that boot off for some reason, I forget why, but there was a lot of oil inside the boot. So luckily I found that before it leaked out and filled up the tunnel with oil. But anyway, that's not something that should leak, and it definitely shouldn't leak as much as it did. And I've also noticed that it seems to leak more some days than other days. Doesn't seem to be a consistent leak. And I read online you should check to make sure that the vent is not clogged. So my theory now, there's a metal vent cap kind of on the top of the transmission that lets the pressure inside the transmission match the outside atmospheric pressure. And if it's clogged and there's pressure differences, then it could definitely be, the pressure inside could be forcing that oil out through those seals. So it could be that the seals are just fine, but there's an issue with pressure. So I'm trying to get that vent off, but unfortunately I don't have the right size wrench. I've already gone to the hardware store and bought the whole series of wrenches here. None of them seem to be big enough. I was hoping this big guy here would do it, but that's not it. So I'm still on the hunt for the correct size. And there's like a mushroom metal cap over the vent, so you can't get a socket on it. It has to be a wrench. So anyway, I'm on the hunt for the correct wrench for that. I'm sure I'll find it in the next day or two. And then hopefully that vent is going to be the issue on the transmission, and that'll fix my leaks. So that's looking promising. If that's not the case, then of course I'll replace that front seal on the shifter shaft, and I'll check that shaft out, and maybe if I have to have it machined or something, I'll do that. But anyway, we'll get to the bottom of those leaks soon. Hopefully I have a very simple fix to it. The engine's coming along great. The carbs should be rebuilt soon, and then like I said, hopefully this stuff all goes back in the car and we start this thing up and it drives itself out of here. That will be a fantastic day. So, all right. That's all for this week, guys. Thanks for watching. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing.